BBC Radio 7.
Now, it's described as a short history of Ireland in 240 parts. Well, as each episode is quite short, what we're going to do is put 2 episodes together, which will make it an even shorter history in 120 parts. So for the next 6 months, we present the story of Ireland from the Ice Age up to recent times.
This is a short history of Ireland in 240 episodes. Episode 1, the first plants, animals and people.
10,000 years ago, there wasn't a single solitary human being in the whole of Ireland. Even though there is evidence that our ancestors began spreading out of Africa around 100,000 years ago. In fact, this part of the world was inhabited very late in all the time that man has roamed the earth. The reason is the last ice age. People simply could not get here because of the severe weather conditions.
The first ice age started 2 million years ago. And from that time, northwestern Europe was subject to long cycles of warmth and intense cold. Today, Ireland is a detached fragment of the continents of Europe and Asia. We are separated only by shallow seas. But then, we were joined to Britain and the European mainland, as we would be again if the ocean were to drop just 100 meters.
During one ice age cold cycle that started 200,000 years ago and lasted 70,000 years, Ireland was covered with 2 great elongated domes of ice, in places a mile thick. This period was followed by a warm spell of around 15,000 years, when the woolly mammoth and the musk ox roamed over grasslands. And then came the last ice age. The ice spread over the northern half of the country with additional ice caps in the Wicklow and Cork and Kerry mountains. The ice sheets finally began to dissolve about 15,000 years before the birth of Christ.
They left behind a landscape scarred and smoothed by the retreating glaciers, which gouged U-shaped valleys and deep-sided corries. Soil and rocks had been shifted enormous distances and dumped as rubble in massive mounds of boulder clay, known as drumlins. There are tens of thousands of drumlins in Ireland, many of these stretching in a belt across southern Ulster from Strangford Lough to Donegal Bay. Meltwater flowing under the ice left behind sinuous ridges of gravel known as eskers. Often several miles long and up to 20 metres in height, these provided vital pathways later on across the boggy midlands.
The bare earth was first colonised by grasses, sorrels and dwarf willow. Reindeer and the giant Irish deer grazed over this tundra. Then, these pioneering species were all but killed off by a 600-year cold snap. So, around 10,000 years ago, the process of colonisation had to begin all over again. As the permafrost melted, the tundra grasslands attracted willow, juniper, birch and hazel. The larger trees soon followed.
It was now a race against time and the rising seas for plants and animals to reach Ireland. At first, so much water was still locked up in ice further north that land bridges with the European mainland remained open and crossable. Then sea levels, which had been about 16 metres lower than they are today, began to rise, swelled by the melting ice. Oak, elm, holly, yew, ash, hawthorn, blackthorn and alder made it to Ireland in time. Beech and sycamore did not. The last land bridges across the Irish Sea were almost certainly swept away by around 8000 BC.
Animals, including brown bears, wild boar, wolves, otters, badgers, red deer, stoats, pine martens, red squirrels, mountain hares, wild cats, pygmy shrews and wood mice, arrived in time to make their home in Ireland. Fallow and roe deer, beavers, weasels, harvest mice, voles and polecats were left behind, cut off by the rising sea waters. The range of freshwater fish was also limited to little more than salmon, trout, arctic char, shad, lampreys and eels. Perch, pike and other coarse fish had to await later introduction by monks.
The first people also travelled across the land bridges running across the Irish Sea. They probably got as far as the Isle of Man before having to make the last leg of the journey in coracles and dugout canoes. The climate which greeted the first humans, who would have looked much like us, was similar to our own, but the landscape was dramatically different. A dense forest canopy covered Ireland so completely that a red squirrel could travel from the northern to the southern tip of the island without ever having to touch the ground.
Oaks and elms dominated the wildwood, particularly on the rich glacial soils. Ash did best on light limestone ground, especially in County Fermanagh. Hazelwood flourished on thinner soil and in season provided rich feeding for wild boar. Alder preferred the wetter loch margins, and Scots pine, once Ireland's most dominant tree, was confined to hill slopes and the western seaboard. Only the highest peaks, the lochs, the rivers and peat bogs, beginning to form as the rains became more persistent, were bereft of trees.